Hello and welcome to Models from Taglo. Today we're going to show you how to build a powerful model from scratch. We'll cover 5 things. How to create a new model, how to develop the structure of your model. Today it's a revenue forecast for a gym company. How to make your model work across multiple business regions and products by using dimensions. How to visualize and test your model with dashboards. And finally, how to generate a perfectly formatted and fully dynamic Excel spreadsheet from your model. Let's get started.
We're going to start in the Home tab. Now this is a fresh installation of models, so there are no new models of our own here, but you can see some inbuilt models that come with the software as indicated by the padlock icon. You can look at these for inspiration or use them as templates. But we're going to create a new model now. So we'll click the New button in the top right. And this is a 5-year revenue forecast for a gym company. So we'll call it Gymco Revenue Forecast. And we need to put it in a namespace. So we're going to create one now called Gymco. If you want to know more about namespaces or anything else, you can read our online help, which is available through the help menu or by clicking on one of these help icons. And that will take you directly to the content that you're interested in. So we now need to define the timings for our model. And this is going to be a quarterly model. So we select quarter in the interval type. And it's going to start in the first quarter of 2025. So we put in 2025 Q1. It's running for 5 years. So that's 20 quarters. And that takes us to the end of December in 2029. But actually, our fiscal year ends in March. So we're going to put a 3 in the fiscal year end month. And now our model is finishing in March 2029. As we'd like. We click finish and that's our model created.
So with our model created, next we're going to build out the structure. We're building a 5-year revenue forecast for a gym company on a quarterly basis. We'll build out a customer growth profile, we'll set a launch date, and we'll apply some pricing to calculate revenues.
We're going to start building out the structure of our model. So we click open, which launches the model editor. And we start in the variables tab. You can think of a variable as a line in your model, and you can see none have been created yet. So our first one is going to be the number of customers in our business, and we'll call that gym members. We'll leave the rest of this setup page as it is and move on to the unit. Now, most of the time models will work out the units of variables for you based on the calculations. But in this instance, gym members is going to actually reference itself. So we're going to have to specify a unit. And it's going to have a unit of member. Now, that unit doesn't exist yet, so we need to create it. And that's easy to do here. In models, there are 2 types of units. There are flows and balances. A flow would be the number of members coming in to our business or out of our business. But that's not what we want here. We want to know the number of members at any given point in time. And we call that a balance. So we're going to change it to balance here. And we move on to our calculation. This is going to be gym members from the previous period plus net member additions. So that's the number of members that our total members changes by. And we obviously haven't created that variable yet. So you can see a plus icon next to the drop down. And when we click it, it's going to create a new variable for us. Now, net member additions is another calculation. We can move straight to the calculation page and start typing in this calculation. Net member additions is going to be equal to the new members that we have minus churned members. And again, we create this new member additions variable. And this time, it's not going to be a calculation, it's going to be an input. So we select the assumptions type here. And that means we have to give it a unit because it's an input. But actually Models has already worked out what the unit probably is going to be anyway. It's a flow of members. So we move on to the time segment step, which is where we enter more information about the variable. And here we have the option of entering 20 assumptions, 1 for every period in our model. But actually we're going to be a little lazy and we're just going to make everything equal to the first period, which we can do by clicking this button. That splits our variable into 2 time segments, one for the first period and one for the rest of them. And all we need to do now is create the missing assumptions for this first period. And we're going to say that we add 20 members each month or 60 members in a quarter. So we enter 60 and finish to create that assumption. This new member additions variable is now finished once we click finish. And we can see that's what we want, 60 new members for every period of the model. So let's finish our net member additions variable. We've created new member additions and we need to subtract the churned members. So again, we create that new variable. It's another calculation, and this one's going to be equal to gym members, again from the previous period, and that previous period is indicated by that -1, which came up automatically, and it's going to be multiplied by the churn rate. Let's create that churn rate variable. Again, this is now going to be an input, so an assumptions variable. And note that the number format's changed to percentage because there's rate in the name of the variable. Again, we need to define a unit. And again, luckily for us, it's guessed the unit correctly. So the unit's going to be members per member, and it's a flow of members in this period divided by the balance of members in the previous period. And again, let's make everything equal to the first period, so we only have to enter one assumption, and that's going to be 5%. So we lose 5% of our previous period's customers in the period. We finish our churn rate variable, we finish our churn members variable, and actually we can finish all the variables that we've created. We've completed all the steps of our calculation here. And we can now go back into our variables view here, expand this tree, and just check that everything's as we expect it. So we have constant churn rate, we have constant member additions, and we now have a growing number of gym members as we'd expect. And we want to add a little more nuance to our model. We want a launch date, and our customers are only going to start growing after that launch date. So let's create a launch date variable. And this is going to be an assumptions variable, and it's going to have data type date. And that gives us a suitable number format here. In our unit, it's unitless, it's just a date, but we want to make it constant. That means there's just one value for the whole duration of the model. And so we have to enter one assumption in here, and let's call that 1st of January 2025. That's our launch date created. And now we want to create something that a lot of modelers call a flag, and this is going to be gym has launched. So this tells us whether the gym has launched or not. This is a Boolean, so it's a true or false type variable. And the calculation there is going to reference the periods of our model. So we type in periods, you can see the little clock icon. We're now referencing the dates in our model. And when period is greater than or equal to the launch date, that tells us if the gym has launched. And we can have a look at that now, and we see that it's 0 before our launch date and 1 afterwards. Perfect. And we're going to use that to change whether our new member additions is 0 or 60. So actually what we're going to do is rename new member additions to be new member additions if launched. And we'll create a new variable called new member additions. And this will have the calculation if gym has launched. And I'm using tab to select the first item in the list there, by the way. If gym has launched, then new member additions if launched, otherwise 0. We finish and check that's what we want, yes. And now all we have to do is replace this part of the calculation with the new variable. New member additions, perfect. We can see the calculation tree has changed appropriately, net member additions only starts after the launch date, and gym members only starts growing after the launch date. Now all that's left to do is to calculate some revenues for the business. So again, we create another variable, and this is going to be called revenues. Now, again, we don't have to specify unit here, but we're going to because it will make life slightly easier for us as we go through the rest of the calculation. And our revenue is going to be in pounds, so we select the inbuilt GBP unit here. It's a flow of pounds into the business, so that's correct. And this is going to be our number of members, gym members, multiplied by the revenues per member. We're going to create that new variable. And revenues per member is going to be the monthly price per member multiplied by the number of months in a period. Let's create that monthly price per member. And this is an assumptions. This is another input to our model. We're going to give it a sort of pound and pence number format. And we'll check the unit. As again, it's had a guess at the unit. It's guessed pounds per member. That's almost right, but we need pounds per member per month. So we add a new section to this unit, and we change it to month. Month is on the top of our unit here, so we need to click the invert button, and now we have pounds per member per month, and that's correct. Don't worry if you don't get units right the first time, you can always change them later. And let's make them all equal to the first period, and we'll say we charge £50 per month per member. So we'll finish that monthly price per member variable. And remember, we're looking for now a pounds per member for our revenues per member variable, and we currently have pounds per member per month. So we need to multiply by number of months in a period. And that will be an assumption. It correctly knows that we want something with a unit of the month, but we want it to be constant. We're only going to enter one value. And we enter that as 3. And finish. And again, all our units is correct. So we can finish out of these calculations now. And there's our revenue calculation as we want it.
That was pretty easy, but our business is actually a bit more complicated than that. We have 2 gym branches, and we're introducing 3 tiers of membership. Now, at this point in Excel, we'd get started with some extensive copying and pasting, and we'd probably make some mistakes along the way. But in models, this process is much, much easier through the use of dimensions. Let's have a look.
To add our dimensions, we start by selecting some of the variables that we want to apply similar dimensions to. In that case, it's going to be some of the variables that go into creating our gym members and also the total revenues. So we'll select those. It's revenues, gym members, net member additions, new member additions if launched, and churned members. These are all going to be broken down both by region and by membership tier. And so we're going to create those dimensions now by clicking Apply Dimensions. So let's create the first dimension we want to use. That's region. And we can give it some children, which is going to be north and south. Click Finish, and we'll select that one. Then the second dimension, again by clicking New, it's going to be membership tier. And this will have 3 children, basic, premium, and platinum. And we've created that, and now let's select it. And when we click Finish, those dimensions will be applied to all of these selected variables. And you can see that's happened. But we have a warning that's come up in our new member additions if launched variable. And that's telling us that we've got some missing assumptions. We need 6 assumptions here, but we've only got 1 so far. So we click on Create Missing Assumptions, and we put in some new values. So let's say in our north region, we're going to gain 45 premium customers each period and 30 platinum. And in the south, we're going to have 54 basic, 36 premium and 24 platinum, let's say. We finish that. And now the warning has gone. We've added the assumptions we need. And that flows through all the way up to our revenues calculation. But we also have some other dimensions to add. So we want to make sure that our price varies by membership tier, for instance. And our churn rate is actually also going to change depending on the membership tier. So we select our churn rate, our revenues per member, and our monthly price per member. Again, click Apply Dimensions. And this time we select just the membership tier dimension. Click Finish. And again, we have some warnings. We need to enter some new churn rates. So let's do that. We'll say that the higher tiers have lower churn rates than the basic tier. So we'll enter 3% for premium and 2% for platinum. And for our price per member, again, click Create Missing Assumptions. And we have £75 for our premium and £115 for our platinum. The warnings have gone. Again, that's all working. And there's one final change we want to make. We're actually going to launch the South region later than the North region. And so we want to apply dimensions to our launch date and our gym has launched variable. So let's do that. We apply the region dimension, finish. Again, create missing assumptions. And this time we're going to add 1st of September 2025. And now if we go up to our revenues, we see that the South region is now growing later than the North region. Now, what you should notice here is that in our revenues and gym members variables, we have 6 items because they're broken down by both the region and the membership tier, whereas the revenues per member is only broken down by the tier. But the revenues variable knows how to select the correct revenues per member without us having to tell it any more information. That's all handled automatically for you. What you'll also see is that Models has added some summary lines to some of the variables that we've applied dimensions to. So you can see for the revenues variable, we now have this all line, which sums up each of the different dimensions and regions. The same goes for gym members. Now, it's not always relevant to take a sum of each of the dimensions for any particular variable. And for instance, that wouldn't be the case for a launch date. It makes no sense to add those up. And so Models knows not to try to do that. For something like revenues per member, actually the situation's a little more complicated. Again, we don't really want to add up the revenues per member. What we're more interested in is an average, indeed a weighted average of those revenues per member. And Models will do that automatically for you. It will look at the revenues and the gym members variables, and it will divide the revenues by the number of gym members to give you the average revenues per member. If that's not what you want for any particular variable, you can always edit that summary line manually. Now that we've done that, we just want to summarize the revenues a bit more. And we'll start by renaming the revenues variable to revenues by region and membership tier. And we're going to create a new variable called revenues by region. And for this one, we're going to apply straight away the region dimension. Our calculation will be revenues by region and membership tier. And Models will automatically summarize this calculation correctly. So when we click Finish and look at the output, we can see that all the North items have been added together and all the South items have been added together. And we can check that that's been done correctly by looking at the 2 variables. And one final summary is we're just going to create a total revenues line. And that's going to be equal to revenues by region, all. and you can see as indicated by the all in the square brackets, that's what it's doing.
We're now happy with our model structure, but we want to test some of our assumptions and see the impact on key outputs. In models, that's easy. We can create dashboards and add charts, metrics, and inputs, and then we can flex those inputs and see the results immediately. You can also add multiple scenarios and sensitivities, but we'll look at those on another tutorial. Let's see how to create dashboards.
To visualize our model, we're going to use a dashboard. So we go to the Dashboards tab and click New. We're going to call this dashboard Summary, and we select it here. Now, we need to select the Show Panels option here, and that shows us the panels that make up the structure of our dashboard. Each dashboard by default starts with a horizontal panel, as indicated by this arrow. And into that panel, we're going to drag a chart, first of all, and we want to show some revenues. So we'll search for revenues, and let's select the revenues by region variable. We can click Finish, and that chart's been added. We also want to add some assumptions that we're going to manipulate. So we drag that in next to the chart and select some assumptions that we want to be able to change, like launch date, churn rate, and pricing. Click Finish. And the last thing we want in our dashboard is some metrics to show some key outputs from our model. But we want them to go horizontally underneath the assumptions table, so we need to add some more panels to do that. So first let's add a vertical panel and drag our assumptions table into that. And then a horizontal panel underneath that, into which we're going to put our metrics. So we select horizontal here, and that panel is now in place. And we can drag metrics into this panel now. Now we haven't created any metrics yet, but we can do it right here. So we click New, and our first metric is going to be total revenues. So revenues across the whole period of the model. In our calculation, we can do sum, open brackets, and we select revenues and total revenues. And because it's a metric, which is just a single figure, it automatically selects a range across our variable, starting at the first period and ending at the last period. And we want to sum all of those together, so that's correct. But we're going to divide by 1,000,000. And actually, in our setup, we're going to select a more appropriate number format to represent the million. We click Finish. There's our metric created, so we can select it to display it in the dashboard. There, done. And let's create one more metric. And this one's going to represent the number of members that we have in the final period of our model. So we'll call it final members. And this time we want to show it by a dimension. We're going to show it by region. And our calculation is going to be gym members. It automatically knows to summarize it by region. And we're going to say, please show it at the last period. So we select last period there. Finish. We select the new metric. Finish that dashboard item. And now that's appeared in our model. We can deselect show panels. And now we have a dashboard that we can use to explore our model a bit. We can change our launch date here. If I move it back a year, see what happens. We can change churn rate, etc. And you can build as many of these dashboards as you need to understand your model better.
We've built our structure, we've added some dimensions, and we've visualized our model in a dashboard. Now one of our investors has asked us to send an Excel spreadsheet of our revenue forecast. So let's see how we'd do that.
To generate our Excel, first we need to create a layout. To do that, we go to the Sheets tab, where we can see the sheets that are going to be in our Excel. By default, there'll always be an assumption sheet and a calculation sheet, and assumptions always need to be on a different sheet from your calculations or your variables. You can create as many of these sheets as you like, and you can call them whatever you like. We're going to call our assumption sheet Inputs, and let's call our calculation sheet Revenues. The dimension sheet is there because we're using dimensions in our model. And That's an admin sheet that we can't edit, but we can hide it in our generated Excel if we don't want to see it. To add items to our layout, there are quite a few ways to do it. And we're going to use the easiest way, which is to get models to do it for us. And to do that, we go to the Variables tab. To see which items are already in our layout or not, we can click View, Show Layout Buttons. And this will show a button which allows us to add any item that isn't already in our layout to the layout. As you can see at the moment, none of the variables are in the layout, so they all have these buttons. We're not going to use these buttons in creating our layout because, as I said, we're going to get models to do it for us. And to do that, we use this Auto Layout button here. Now, all we need to do here is select the topmost item in our model, so that's total revenues. And when we create the auto layout, models will add everything to the model that it needs in order to calculate the total revenues. So let's press it now. And now Models is going to ask us to select a sheet that we want us to add those calculations to. So we select the revenue sheet and we can just click Finish. And if we go to the Sheets tab now, we can see that in our revenues, all our items have been added to that sheet in a logical structure, finishing with total revenues at the bottom of the sheet. And we can look through any of these items that's added and check that the layout makes sense. Same for the input sheet, where all our assumptions have been added. Now we could just stick with a layout like that, but actually we don't want quite as much nesting of all these groups that we currently have in our revenue sheet, and we're going to make a few adjustments. So firstly, we're going to get rid of this revenues by region group and promote the two beneath it. And we can do that really easily with just one click by selecting revenues by region and pressing flatten here. And that brings those two child groups up to the top. And we're going to do that once more for the revenues by region and membership tier group. So now we have gym members, our revenues per member, and then the revenue summaries. And in fact, these revenue summary groups, we don't really need them separate. So let's combine those into a new group, which we're going to call revenue summary. Okay, so we're now happy with that layout. And we'll just check similarly the layout for the inputs. And again, that looks fine. The only change we want to make is we want to have our timings separate. So we're going to drag this launch date group up to the top. And let's change the name of that group to timings. I used the Control-E shortcut there to edit the launch date group, by the way. Click Finish, and that's done. And now lastly, we want to add the dashboard that we created into our layout. And to do that, we need to create a new sheet to put our dashboard on. So we click New, select a sheet type, which is Dashboard, and select the only dashboard that we have. In our setup sheet, we don't have to change anything, but we're just going to make the sheet blue so that we know it's a dashboard sheet. And it's been added, but we have a warning here, and that's that we have metrics on our dashboard which aren't in our layout yet. So we need to add those, and we can click this Add to Sheet button. And we need to add these metrics to a metrics sheet, and we don't have any of those in the model yet. So let's create that now. We're going to call it KPIs. You can Finish. We select that sheet, and we need to select a line group on that sheet to add the metrics to. We don't have any line groups yet, so let's create one. We'll call it KPIs again, and now select that. Finish, and that first metric has been added, and we just need to add the second metric to the same line group on the KPI sheet. That's done, all our warnings have gone, and let's just move our dashboard down so that it's the final sheet in the model, and we're ready to generate our Excel. And to do that, all we need to do is go to Excel in the menu, click Generate Excel, and that's done. If If I just open up the Excel it's created, here we can see we have a model. It's fully dynamic. We can change any of these inputs on our dashboard. There we go. Let's put that churn rate back to 5%. We can see the impact it has on revenues and members. And this is all driven by a fully working calculation engine. All of these formulas are real formulas, as you would type them in if you were creating the Excel from scratch. And this is a model that you can send to your clients or your boss. Fully working.
So, in this tutorial, we've created a quarterly model over 5 years. We've built a structure for our revenue forecast, including customer projections and a launch date. We've added dimensions to the model to reflect the different regions and membership tiers of our business. We've created a dashboard to quickly analyse the impact of changes to our assumptions. And finally, we've generated a perfectly formatted and fully dynamic Excel spreadsheet to share with investors. We've just scratched the surface of what you can do with models. There's so much more. Flexing outputs with scenarios and sensitivities, performing Excel-style lookups, using Lambda functions to create complex calculations. And we'll cover all of these and more on future tutorials. But don't forget, you can read now about all of Models functionality in our extensive online documentation here. In the meantime, have fun modelling, and we'll see you again soon.